Hi everyone, Sal Khan here from Khan Academy. Welcome to our daily homeroom. For those of y'all who are new to this is something that we started doing a few weeks ago as we started seeing the mass school closures. And obviously, Khan Academy, we're a not-for-profit with a mission of providing a free world-class education for anyone, anywhere. And we realized that as the schools were closing, we wanted to put our resources together so that it could be as useful as possible for you, the student, the teacher, the parent. And we also wanted to provide more supports, especially since all of us are now socially distanced, so that we can feel connected, so that we can answer each other's questions, so that we can support each other. And so we've been running teacher webinars, parent webinars, and we have been doing this daily homeroom, which is just a way to connect, talk about whatever y'all have on your mind, and to have interesting guests. Now, before we get into the meat of the homeroom, so to speak, I will say what I always say, a reminder that we are a not-for-profit. We are funded with philanthropic donations. We were running at a deficit even before this COVID crisis hit, and now our traffic is about 2.53x of what it typically is, and so our costs have gone more, and we want to provide more supports. So if you are in a position to do so, please think about donating to Khan Academy. I do want to give special thanks to several corporate partners who have stepped up in the last few weeks, really in record time, to help Khan Academy with this effort. Bank of America, Novartis, Google.org, AT&T, and of course there's many other longtime supporters. But we still need more help. We're still digging into our reserves in order to stay operational. So now that I've given you my plug, I want to introduce our guest. We've had a lot of questions about all things academic. How do we keep learning in math? How do we keep learning in the humanities? And how do you keep learning in foreign language? And so I have today Luis Van An, an old friend of mine, who is the founder, CEO of Duolingo. Many of y'all might be familiar. It's a place that's an app where you can learn languages for free. But I don't know, Luis, maybe you're more qualified than I am. Tell me about what y'all do at Duolingo.
Well, thank you for having me, Sal. And thank you for this initiative. It's great that you guys are doing it. Well, at Duolingo, I mean, we teach languages. That's the main thing we do. You can either do it online in a computer at duolingo.com, or you can download an iPhone app or an Android app. It's free to learn. It's entirely free to learn. And you can learn as much as you want for free. And the other thing is that we spend a lot of time making sure that it's fun to learn a language with Duolingo, so it feels a lot like you're playing a game when you're learning on Duolingo. We've worked really hard on that.
And what are you? I can see we're seeing some screenshots now from Duolingo. And Luis, what are you seeing in this? I guess how are people using Duolingo before? Was it being integrated with your kind of traditional, high school classes and languages, or is it mainly adults who are trying to learn maybe for a business trip? And then how are you seeing the usage change since the crisis began?
Yeah, I mean, we have a ton of users. I mean, we have over 300 million users worldwide. It's all over the place. I mean, the age range is from 70 years old to 90 some years old. There's, as far as we know, we don't know for a fact because we don't really track this. Anybody really can use Duolingo, but as far as we know, about 25% of language classrooms in the U.S. use Duolingo in one way or another. So we do have a lot of student users, but we also have a lot of adult users who are just, wanting to improve on their high school French or something. Since everybody's been staying at home, we've seen our usage go up quite a bit, and our user base is pretty global. Only about 20% of our users are in the United States. And one thing that's been interesting is pretty much every country, as soon as they apply their social distancing measures, we see traffic increase about 1 or 2 days after that. And it depends on the country. In some countries, it has more than doubled. In some countries, it has gone up by 50%. It kind of depends on the country. But we've seen that the first country, obviously, where we saw that was China. About 3 months ago, basically the traffic in China doubled, and it's remained like that. So I don't know what that means. A lot of China's back to normal, or mostly normal. Yet our traffic remains essentially twice what it was before.
And what do you think is underlying that? I mean, let's say China, for example. I am curious, what language are folks learning? Is it all languages? Is it English? And then what do you think is the motivation? People are like, I'm home, I might as well do something productive, or are there other motivations?
I think the motivations. I think there's both. I think there's a lot of kids who had to be in school and now are home and they're trying to figure out to learn whatever they used to be learning, and a lot of teachers are telling them to use Duolingo. But there's also people who are just bored at home, and it used to be the case that they used to go to a restaurant. Now that time is being occupied for something else, and they think that improving their lives is an important thing. So I think a lot of people are doing that. In terms of what languages people are learning, it really depends on the country. In most non-English speaking countries, people are learning English. That's the main language that most everybody is learning. In the United States, the biggest language is Spanish. Second is French, then German, then Japanese, and then it tapers off quite a bit. We do offer in the US, from English, you can learn about 35 languages on Duolingo, but some of the smaller ones. You can learn High Valyrian from Game of Thrones. You can learn Esperanto. You can learn a lot of kind of some of the smaller languages, but those not too many people are learning those compared to Spanish, for example.
Is High Valyrian a fully fleshed out language that like we could have a rich conversation in?
I think so. I think there's a lot of strange things. I think it has a lot of different words for things like sword or stuff like that.
Yes, as we know, Eskimos have 6 words for ice, so I guess.
Let me tell you something else, which I don't know what this says about the world, but during, when the seasons were on for Game of Thrones, there were more people learning High Valyrian on Duolingo than there were people learning Irish, for example, or Scottish, which I don't know what this says about the world, but that was the case.
Fascinating, fascinating. And what's your sense? Now there's a lot of parents and adults who, I have always had aspirations to get better at certain languages or learn certain languages. What's your general advice there? I guess this advice would carry over even if we weren't in this crisis situation. Where do you think Duolingo is really strong? And then what would you supplement that with if you really were trying to, get conversational in Spanish or English or some other language?
Yeah, I mean, I think well, the first thing to know about learning a language is that it takes a while. There's a lot of kind of fake news marketing out there that says you can get fluent in a language in 9 days or whatever. This is just not true. It'll take years to get really fluent in a language. You can get a lot of progress in a few months, but if you really, really want to get very advanced in a language, it takes years. So the first thing I think you got to do is build a habit. As with most everything else. So if you build a habit, spend 15, 20 minutes a day using Duolingo, and you do it over a long period of time, you get quite good at it. Things I would recommend once you get to a point where you've done about half the Duolingo course, or maybe a little more than that. I would recommend watching. You can watch Netflix in Spanish or shows in other languages. I would recommend watching those. A lot of times you can watch them with the subtitles. Now try watching them with the subtitles in the language you're learning, not in English, because then you just won't pay attention. But if you watch with the subtitles in Spanish too, I think that's a pretty good way to get much better at, after you do Duolingo. But you do, you can't quite start by doing that because it's pretty hard to understand the things.
Yeah, and I remember that I used to watch these Spanish dramas when I was trying to learn Spanish. It is effective. And you touched on some questions where, from Instagram. Sanath_7 asked, how do you establish a habit of learning every day? You just mentioned the importance of habit. What do you recommend for people who are trying that?
Yeah, well, one of the important things I think is to do it every day at the same time. That helps. If you just, for example, personally, the way I do it is basically, as soon as I wake up, kind of the first thing I do is do my Duolingo. If you pair it with something else, it's like, well, I'll do it right after I brush my teeth, or I'll do it right after lunch, and do it at the same time every day. That seems to really help. Another thing is that it's the first maybe 20-ish days that really matter. I mean, we see it in our data. If we can get you to come back consistently for about 20 days. Then you'll come back to Duolingo for very long periods of time. So you just got to try to stick to it for about 20 days.
I see. And we have some questions for you in particular, from YouTube. Reverend Hogwash is asking, how many languages does Luis speak? And you just mentioned that you are still learning languages. So I'll extend that. Not only how many do you speak, but what are you trying to learn right now?
Okay, I will say I am relatively good at English. I am relatively good at Spanish, about the same as English and Spanish. I'm pretty good at Portuguese. It's not quite as good as English, but almost. And then I am intermediate beginner in French. The pronunciation is my nemesis for French.
And what are you trying to learn right now? You mentioned you still have a
There's this
habit of going on
with French.
Duolingo.
I'm doing French. That's the one I started about a few months ago. I started with French after I learned Portuguese. I started with French a few months ago.
Fascinating. And people are asking, several folks, this is from Instagram, BakerGirl325 asks, why did you create Duolingo?
Ah, that's a great question. I started Duolingo. It wasn't just me. I mean, there's a whole team of people that works on it. But at the beginning, there were two of us, me and my co-founder. His name is Severin, and his last name is Hacker, by the way, which is crazy. But we started it, and the idea was that we wanted to do something that would give equal access to education to everybody. I mean, it's something you know about, Sal. In particular, for us, neither of us is from the US. We both had to learn English when we were growing up. And English has opened so many doors for us. I mean, we were able to come to the United States, come to college, etc. And we knew that in most countries in the world, non-English speaking countries of the world, knowledge of English can increase your income potential by sometimes as much as 100%. So you can basically double your income if you know English. So we knew that. But at the same time, most of the ways there were to learn languages were pretty expensive at the time. So what we wanted to do was to make a way to learn languages that was going to be free. And in particular, we wanted to concentrate on English. It turns out that English is a big language for us, but now we've basically decided to teach pretty much every language. We're not there yet. There are 6,000 languages, and we only teach 35, but we're working on it.
And you mentioned you're free, and this is something we have in common, and we have slightly different models. We're philanthropically funded, but it is an interesting question. I think a couple of people are referring to it. So how do you all exist? How do you make money if you're giving
Yeah,
for
yeah.
free?
Our mission was always to for anybody to be able to learn the language entirely for free on Duolingo. And the question is, how are we going to make money? What we decided to do is kind of this double thing that is similar to how, for example, Spotify makes money. You can fully learn a language on Duolingo, but after every lesson, you have to watch a very short ad. That's usually just a static image. Sometimes it's about a couple of seconds where you have to watch an ad. So basically, watch ads. That's one way we make money. But if you don't want to watch the ads, you can also pay to subscribe to Duolingo, and that turns off the ads. So it's one of those two ways. And yeah, only 3% of our users pay us to turn off the ads. The other 97% are using it entirely for free.
Yeah, and this is an important thing to bring up because you have to figure, whether you run as a not-for-profit or a for-profit, there's some way. Yeah, a lot of folks I think imagine Khan Academy is still Sal in a closet someplace, or they imagine Luis and your co-founder Severin Hacker, which is an incredible name. I mean,
Yeah.
to start a company with that, it's just, but these, it costs a lot of resources, and so you have to figure out some way to make it work while still being true to your mission, which I think y'all are doing a great job. So. Here's a question. I don't know if this would fall under your domain, Luis, but maybe you have a point of view. I could try to attempt as well. From YouTube, Ashutosh Tawari, who's actually a regular question asker here, says, "Hello, Luis and Sal. How do I overcome stuttering? If you stutter more in English." I don't know if this is something that y'all even address, or you have a point of view on this, Luis.
It's not something that we do with the app. I actually would not know how to overcome stuttering. I myself stutter a little bit. So if you have good ideas, Sal, let me know.
Yeah, I'm not an expert in it either. I have been known to stutter every now and then. One thing that was interesting, and I don't know if this is related to stuttering, but I remember my first job, this was at Oracle. I was a product manager, and I had to go to this training on public speaking. And what they did is they videotaped you while you gave a
Yes.
speech. And then
Yes.
when you watched it, every time you said in your speech, you also had to say and everyone in the room said And that made me very conscientious of I still say it, but you don't realize how much you say words like And I know every language has its own version of
Not only that, I mean, I before this, I was a professor in computer science, and on my first year, somebody told me that I should videotape myself in every lecture and then watch myself. First of all, it was extremely painful. And secondly, you start annotating things like, how many times you say, for me, one of the bad things I used the word like a lot.
Yes.
And that was pretty bad. And I think that actually helped.
For sure, for sure. And it is a painful experience. I try not to even watch these live streams afterwards, if you can imagine. So from YouTube, the Disney and Travel Guy asks, any tips to learn Spanish? I'm trying to learn Spanish on Duolingo and I really want to be fluent. So what should the Disney and Travel Guy do here, Luis?
Well, keep at it. Like I said, it takes a while to become fluent in a language. And I would say once you've gotten some of the basics, which if you're maybe down to the middle of the Duolingo course or three-quarters down the Duolingo course, I will say something that I said before in this. I would try starting watching some Netflix shows in Spanish. There's some really good ones. I particularly like The Money Heist, but there are others. And watch it. And if it's too hard for you, try maybe children's shows in Spanish. They're a little easier. And also try turning on the subtitling, but the subtitling in Spanish. That should help.
Yep. And what is your, for someone who wants to become fluent, what's your sense of immersion or some version, if you can't travel to the country, some version of immersion, like getting on video chats with folks or something like that. What role does
Yeah,
that play?
all of that helps. There's a problem with it. It is most people have too much social anxiety to get on video chats with random strangers in a language that they're not very good at. So, if you're able to overcome that, that's a pretty good solution. But I think a lot of people it's just too much social pressure for them. So in that case, I don't think that's absolutely necessary. I think you can get pretty far by just using tools like Duolingo and watching TV shows and stuff like that.
Cool. So if you can, obviously Duolingo, the Netflix in Spanish or whatever, those are great things that anyone can do, like starting now. And then if you can overcome the social pressure, maybe get on some of, I know there are, I don't know their names, but there's ways that you can get connected with folks and get, talk to live people in the other languages. So it's interesting. So
Yeah.
this is a question, I guess, for both of us, from Instagram, manfree.ganmore asks, does the speed at which you learn affect the retention of knowledge for language or math? So you could take the language side, or if you have a point of view on the math side. Do you think there are certain people who are better at languages than others, or do you think it's just in our minds?
There's I do think there are certain people who are a little better than others. There's been research about that. Some of it has to do with general intelligence, but actually one of the biggest things is just being okay sounding not so smart. If you're okay with that, I think you're better at learning languages, because one of the biggest things that helps you learn languages faster is if you start speaking. The sooner you start basically able to vocalize and say stuff, the better. This is why with Duolingo, we recommend that whenever you're doing the Duolingo exercises, you just try to mouth them, just like kind of vocalize everything that you're seeing. The sooner you start being able to talk to others, the better you get. And so one of the ways in which some people are better at learning languages is they just basically don't care as much about sounding, broken.
No, and that's so. What you're really saying is, we talk a lot about things like mindset and growth mindset here at Khan Academy, and you're really making the same point that people who are more comfortable putting themselves out there, they're not afraid to fail, that those folks in general are going to grow more versus the people who are like, oh, I don't sound intelligent in this language yet. Let me just kind of keep preparing
Yes.
their preparations. And I think the exact same thing is in math. I think people are quick to label themselves or others as slow learners or fast learners. You might see the kid in your class and she's always getting the A's and you're always getting a few points less. Oh, maybe she's a fast learner. But the reality is, she was probably the person who's always pushing, stepping out of her comfort zone, willing to get questions wrong. If she gets the question wrong, she'll reflect on it. And she's always trying to draw connections between things. I think probably the same thing is true in languages as in math, is the more associations you can make with something, the more it'll be fluent to you, the more it'll come to your, I'm not a expert at this, but at least on experience and observing others. And we've interfaced with a lot of the experts on things like grit and growth mindset. That really seems to be the best correlate. So let's see.
Totally agree.
From Instagram, Sam I804 asks, how can I make the process of learning a language fun? and I'm assuming above and beyond using the fun Duolingo, or how
So
can I
the
make
main
using
way
Duolingo even more fun?
The main way is by using Duolingo. I mean, we spend a lot of effort making Duolingo as fun as possible. There's a lot of features on Duolingo that make it more fun. For example, we have these leaderboards with leagues where the idea is that whenever you join Duolingo, you get paired with, it's not paired, grouped with about 50 other people who started around the same time as you. And for the next week, you get to see who gets more experience points. And the top 10 people in that group of 50 move on to the next league. Everybody starts in the bronze league, then the top 10 move on to the silver league. Then next week, the top 10 move on to the gold league, and then we have a bunch of leagues like that. So that competition actually makes the app significantly more fun. So I think that's one thing. Another thing that we really believe in is that with Duolingo you can learn in 2 to 3 minute segments. So anytime you basically are waiting for something for 2 minutes or something, you can just get in a little bit of Duolingo, and I think that's another way. If you just parse it out into smaller chunks, that helps.
It's great. And on Facebook, a question from Margot McGinnis. Oh, hi, Margot. I know Margot. My kids need to catch up with sixth grade Spanish for a new school over the summer, starting from scratch. Any tips?
Download Duolingo. I would say it depends. You know, for sure, download Duolingo. I would say try to get them. Other tips that of things that we hear other than Duolingo and maybe watching some Netflix in Spanish is try reading the news in Spanish. There's also some podcasts. By the way, we have a podcast. There's the Duolingo Spanish podcast, but there's others, and you can try to listen to some podcasts. Some of them are pretty fun. The Duolingo in particular one, the Duolingo podcast, is basically real stories of people from Latin America about stuff, like soccer players and stuff like that are in very slow Spanish, and that helps you.
Yeah, one of my ideas, just speaking generally about learning languages, I have memories of my family's original tongue is Bengali, and but my mom also spoke Hindi and / Urdu to some of her friends, and growing up in New Orleans, there's no immersion for that, but I would hear her conversations with her friends, and especially when she was saying something really juicy that wasn't meant for my ears, it would be either in Bengali, Hindi / Urdu, and that's how I got my functional. Your brain definitely
It's
picks
a high
up.
reward to understand it. You got to understand the juicy
Right,
stuff.
right. When your brain wants to understand what it's not allowed to understand. But yeah, so I could imagine actually Margot's situation. A lot of parents are trying to figure out, it might be a situation like that you're transitioning a school, or obviously school's out. Can you leverage? We've been advocating how you can use the remainder of the school year and even the summer to keep learning in Spanish. In math, but obviously the same thing can happen in Spanish or languages or other subjects. So, other questions here. A few people are asking you, Luis, what was your original tongue? Spanish, I'm assuming.
I am a native Spanish speaker. Yes,
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Guatemala. Yes, right underneath Mexico. That's where it is.
And so these other languages that you've learned or learning, like Portuguese and French, this is just out of interest, or do you have a lot of friends? Or you travel a lot to those regions?
It's out of interest. I mean, I figured I should learn some languages given that I am the CEO of Duolingo. So yes, but it is out of interest in those languages.
Right. Oh, great. Well, I think let's see, you've covered a lot of this. Scott asked how many languages do you offer to learn? I think it was 35.
35. From English, you can learn 35 languages.
Yeah. And here's a question from YouTube. Nikhil Govender asks, if someone has a learning disability, they're asking both Khan Academy and Duolingo how it's suited to help. Any thoughts there, Luis?
Um, well, it depends on what learning disability, but I think we know of a lot of people who have all kinds of different learning disabilities who very successfully use Duolingo. We know, we try to make the app as accessible as possible. We know, for example, we know a lot of people with dyslexia that successfully use Duolingo. You can turn off certain exercise types, and that seems to help. So depending on the learning disability, I think it can work pretty well.
Yeah, we see a similar situation on the Khan Academy side that we haven't done any focused studies for many learning disabilities, but to your point, we're trying to make it as accessible as possible. And then we've anecdotally heard for certain students, maybe with ADHD or dyslexia or someplace on the Asperger spectrum, in certain cases, being able to work at your own pace, slow down things, speed things up, get immediate feedback on exercises, things like that, which is true of both of our platforms and other online platforms, that sometimes can be helpful. But I think there's probably a lot more research to be had. Well, Luis, thanks for joining us on and answering these questions about language. I think this is an area where Khan Academy. I get a lot of questions. When is Khan Academy going to teach language? And we have Khan Academy in other languages, but I always say there's no need for us to do it because there's Duolingo. So
Well, thank you.
go to Duolingo and figure out. So yeah, keep doing the amazing work y'all do.
No, and thank you for doing this and for all the amazing work. We're huge fans of Khan Academy here.
Likewise.
Yeah, thank you.
So everyone, I think there's a couple of other questions that y'all are asking generally, but I will just say, we're doing this every day, and I think we're coming up to the half hour. But keep your questions going. If I can't get them in over today, over the next few days, then I will try to answer them in future days. But as I mentioned, this is just a forum for all of us to stay in touch, stay connected during the school closures, talk about things that might be relevant for getting you through the school closures, or things that might just be interesting since we're all socially distanced now. Expect over the next few weeks we will have many other interesting guests like Luis to talk about anything from how you might try to tackle a certain subject, how you might try to stay just happy and content in this otherwise stressful period, or things about how you be creative at home, or what's the state of the economy. I'll also put my plug in again, reminder that we are a not-for-profit. If you are in a position to do so, please think about donating to Khan Academy. We are running at a deficit, especially given all of the traffic and the use of the resources because of this crisis. So I'll let y'all go. Thank you for coming to the homeroom live stream today. I actually have my daughter with me. She didn't want to. Can I show you, Dia? She's right here. Let me see if I can. Oh, no. There she is. There she is. She's ignoring me.
What?
No, she's got headphones on. But yeah, she was my special guest. I wanted her to be in the live stream with me, but she didn't want to. But I'll let y'all go, and I'll see you tomorrow. Stay safe, stay healthy.